Hey, it's Clay. Welcome to another League of Legends video. This time we're going to be doing an patch notes for patch 4.4 analysis. It's actually been pretty delayed. I was on vacation last week, but I figure better late than never. So for those of you who are interested in hearing my thoughts on the patch changes, here they are. And I've had a little bit of time to kind of play with them, so this is a little bit less of like a forward speculation and a little bit more of like, these are the changes, these are how this has changed the game, at least from my perspective. So let's start off with the Kassadin rework. Kassadin has been a problem for a very long time. Just months and months and months of him being in like the 90% pick ban. I mean, like, I cannot remember the last time that he was neither picked nor banned in a ranked match. His LCS throughout the spring split, his pick ban percentage was insanely high, just a very problematic champion. He had a tremendous combination of mobility, damage, and also his crowd control with his silence and his slow was just very oppressive. It's almost impossible to escape a Kassadin, so if you ever get into a team fight against a Kassadin and your team starts to lose, instead of just having one person die and you kind of disengage, everybody dies because Kassadin chases you down and games just get out of control in the mid game. So they're reworking him to try to reduce some of his frustration. His kit was pretty oppressive, so I think this was warranted. So anyways, let's start off with his passive. He's getting a little boost of his auto attack range. This is mildly important because a lot of his damage has shifted to melee auto attacks. So a little bit of refocusing, and this kind of fits with that theme. His passive has changed. He used to get this, he had a weird passive. It would give him bonus attack speed per the magic damage reduced. It was very strange. But it no longer grants attack speed, and now grants the ability to ignore unit collisions. So very much focusing. His new role is somebody who is going to be darting in and out of contact, very slippery, very highly mobile. That's really his identity now, as somebody who, it gets into the fight, deals damage in melee range, it gets out, darts back in, darts back out. That's kind of his new play pattern. Moving on to his Q, before it was a point-and-click targeted ability that did damage and silenced your opponent. The silence is gone. It does remain the ability to interrupt channeled spells. Then the base damage has been lowered fairly significantly. It was at one time like 240, and now all the way down to 180. So very, very low base damage. But now it also grants him a shield that will block magic damage. So again, focusing him as a very magic damage, like an anti-caster assassin, is really, again, part of Kassadin's ability. So he's extremely mobile. He's extremely good against mages, and he's got to get in a melee range. It's kind of his idea now. So between his passive, which will reduce 15% magic damage, and then his shield, which will block magic damage, makes him very resilient against heavy magic damage teams. And so, yeah, that's really something to stand out about Kassadin's kit, is that it very much is strong against heavy magic damage. So if you've got like a double AP with Annie support and a Elise jungle, that's like 4 magic damage dealing champs on the enemy team that Kassadin's going to be pretty good against. I would say that overall his Q got nerfed. No longer having a silence is a pretty big deal. Before, once you hit level 6, you can Rift Walk on top of your opponent, you can silence them with your Q, get your E, get a couple of W's off, and walk away. And because they were silenced during the duration of that trade, it's pretty much free damage. And that's really, one of his core, identities. And that's been removed. Not having the silence is a really big deal. Also, this shield is a little bit wimpy. It's just not that good of a shield. I don't know. I'm just not convinced that this magic damage shield is going to be that strong. If it was just a standard shield that blocked all damage, I would overall say that the Q kind of stayed the same, but because they're gutting the base damage and it doesn't have the silence, and now it grants a shield, I don't know. It just is weaker, in my opinion. Now his W is hands down better. It has a passive component where his auto attacks deal 20 base damage plus 0.1 AP, not a big deal, but the active actually is a really important part of his kit now. It has no cost, and it's on a 6-second cooldown, so that's what's changed quite a bit. It has fairly high moderate base damage with a 0.6 AP ratio. So basically what this means is that Kassadin, when you jump in, you really need to get your W-empowered auto attack off as a part of your combo now. before you could kind of Rift Walk in, EQ, and do whatever you want to do. His W was just kind of there. But now this empowered auto attack is really important, and also this really shifts his itemization towards, in my opinion, him requiring Lich Bane, or perhaps even Iceborne Gauntlet. Some sort of Sheen item is going to be very core to Kassadin now. In my opinion, Lich Bane is the best fit. Lich Bane also did get nerfed this patch, so you could say that's a nerf to the rework Kassadin as well, but because so much of his power has been shifted, there's a nerf in damage here, there's a nerf in damage here, there's a nerf in damage here, but that's because they gave him a lot of damage on this empowered auto attack. So getting a Lich Bane will further kind of enhance that. Now there is also a mana restoration component here, which does percent missing mana. I believe his old W was flat missing or flat mana return on auto attack. But now, when you hit the empowered auto attack, you gain percent of your missing mana, and this is a really significant against champions. So, and this is really nice because Kassadin usually itemizes for a lot of mana with a Tear and maybe a Rod of Ages, and then also if you get a Lich Bane, that's a lot of mana. And so if you're restoring 40% of that mana, that's quite a bit. Definitely, yeah, a lot of damage was shifted to his W, and using his W properly is really the core of getting the most out of the new Kassadin, in my opinion. Next up is the Force Pulse, just a flat nerf to the base damage. Look, 240 to 180. Again, really big nerf. 240 to 180, 200 to 180 on his Q. His base damages have really been gutted. Yeah, not much else to say there. And then Rift Walk was changed quite a bit as well. It now has mana scaling instead of AP scaling. And this is very curious because I actually did the numbers here. So if you get 400 ability power with a 0.8 ratio, that's 320 bonus damage. Pretty darn good. But if you get like 4,000 mana times 2%, that's only 80. So this damage is just, again, very much gutted. 2% mana scaling, like if we contrast this with Rise, he's the other champion that's typically noted to have mana scaling. He gets 6.5%, 4.5%, 3%, so, or 1%. So, he has a lot more mana scaling, whereas just having one ability that's 2%, it's just very low base and scaling damage. But the real kicker here is that the cooldown was reduced quite heavily, so we're down to 3 seconds at max rank, which is actually pretty significant. And so this overall, the shift in his playstyle moves from somebody who's extremely mobile and has big burst damage and has some nice, utility crowd control to this, extremely mobile. A 3-second flash is insane. But, he also needs to get into melee range with his W. Still really good against mages with his Q and his passive, but very, very low base damage, so you need to be building him, probably Glass Cannon. I have heard people talk about more of like a mage tank build, but I'm just not seeing it. He still has pretty good AP scaling, 0.7, 0.6, 0.7. So, yeah, definitely not the kind of... He's kind of reminds me a little bit of a Kali now, in the fact that he's going to be relying on, kind of getting in the fight, dealing his damage, kind of more of a sustained damage assassin, rather than kind of like a Zed or a Talon who just one-shots somebody, more on that spectrum. But overall, an interesting change to Kassadin. I have played one game, a normal game with him, and it went very poorly. Now, every lane lost, and our jungler didn't do very well, so that could be part of it. He's kind of in a situation where if he gets behind, he becomes very useless. And that's typical of assassins, but I would say overall, he felt weaker. Time will tell how this rework shakes out, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that Kassadin is the champion that he used to be. Just very much weaker overall, in my opinion. Now, they did take out a lot of his really frustrating elements with his Q, and the Rift Walk damage, not scaling as much, and moved a lot of his damage to melee range, which, makes sense. If he's going to be so mobile, he should have to take risks to deal damage. But anyways, that's probably enough on the Kassadin rework. I don't think he's that strong, but we'll kind of, time will tell. And something needed to be done about him because he was pretty insane. So changes to Annie. basically they are continuing the trend of trying to reduce her power as a support and keep her viable as a mid laner. So interesting on her Q, now if you last hit, you get the half the cooldown. So it's like a 4-second cooldown, so that'll be like a 2-second cooldown when you last hit. And it already has a component where if you get a last hit with your Q, it doesn't cost any mana. So her Q is like the best farming tool in the entire game. But you trade it off for weaker base damage. You know, we're going from 85 to 80, 245 to 220. But then to compensate, they're giving her a 0.1 AP ratio. So I actually don't know where the break-even point is. Let's actually figure that out. So 245 times, let's maybe do, it was 0.7 times, let's try 300. Okay, so that's how much, oh, that's not right. Let's do plus. Okay, so 455 damage there. Now let's take this and do a new tab, and let's do 0.8. But I think it's 220. Yep, 220. So 460. Okay, so it looks like at about 300 is the break-even point. Let's reduce this to 100. Yep, so 315, 300. So that's definitely about right. So once you hit about 300-ish AP, that's when she actually does better. So she actually scales harder into late game, and the changes were also similar in her W and her R. Lower base damage, but higher AP scaling. So actually, as a mid laner, Annie could potentially make a little bit of a comeback. It didn't really address her core problem, which is her lack of mobility. And especially against highly mobile champions, she just struggles. But her ability to scale into late game, build a bunch of AP items, get a DFG, and one-shot somebody is still really, really strong. Her laning got helped out a little bit with this cooldown, so she can farm really easily. So yeah, a buff to mid lane Annie, a nerf to support Annie, but you know, just kind of shifting her power around. I think these are good changes. I like what they did here. Now Diana, to compensate for the Lich Bane changes, they gave her a 0.2 AP ratio buff to her passive. I actually wasn't aware that Lich Bane was core on Diana. I know that a lot of Dianas built it, but I didn't really think it was core. I don't know, I actually haven't seen that much Diana, and I haven't actually figured out what the best way to play her is. I know I've seen her as a AP jungler, I've seen her as an assassin, I've seen her as more of like a AP bruiser, and I think Diana is kind of just in a weird spot. Personally, if I were to really pick her up and start playing her, I would try to play her as more of a bruiser, where she can be an initiator and kind of like a frontliner, and rely on her passive. So I would build stuff like Nashers, and then you know, like Sunfire, and maybe even like a Sheen item, like Iceborne Gauntlet, something like that. And just kind of be somebody who can get in the mix, use your vacuum to suction everybody in, and be an initiator, that kind of thing. But I know the assassin build is still really good, and you can like kind of one-shot somebody with like a QRR with your shield up too. WQRR does a lot of damage. So I don't know. I mean, Diana I think is a little weak, and this is an overall buff to her, no matter what. So I think, yeah, it's fine that they gave her this, because she's not really that strong. And who knows, you know, buffs like this, you know, who knows, maybe a Nashor's build on Diana would be really good, because then you can get that third proc off multiple times, and that's a lot of damage. You know, an 8.8 ratio is really big. So yeah, we'll kind of see how this works on Diana moving forward. Keep an eye on champions that get buffed. You know, if Diana is considered weak, if she gets buffs, maybe she gets another minor buff in another patch, she could become really big again. So keep an eye on stuff like this. Now Elise. Elise has been especially, I think this is more of an LCS targeted ban, because she is extremely, you know, coveted as a jungler in the LCS. And basically they are reducing her damage and increasing her utility. So her base damage on her Q in both spider and human form was reduced. And then the big thing was that they cut the damage in half to monsters. The cap of damage to monsters. So before, at least you could like solo dragon at level 6, and you can do 2-man barons really easily, and you can clear your big monsters really fast. That was like one of her calling points as a jungler, is that she has tremendous objective control. You know, like a venomous bite plus smite is almost unbeatable in terms of damage. I mean, that's like almost just as good, if not better, than Nunu in his like consume smite combo. But they're definitely reducing that control and that power. So definitely a nerf to her in terms of like an LCS styled jungler. Now I don't necessarily think these base damages really crush her, because there still is the percentage stuff backing it, but against champions to say. So, but take that in mind. And then they shifted power to her E. Her E is usually her 1-point skill. So actually, I would consider this to be a little bit of a nerf, because the stun duration was changed to scale, starting at 1 second up to 2 seconds. So once you hit like rank 3, it's the same, and then higher it's better, but below it's worse. And because this is your 1-point skill, this is probably a nerf, and then unchanged on the 1-point skill on repel, but 4 seconds early on max rank. So for a late game at least, this will help her utility out, but for much of the game, it's really no change. So overall, a definite nerf. And then her spiderlings got increased health. I actually don't know exactly how impactful this is. I still think 390 is like one Ziggs bomb can probably clear all of those spiderlings, so whatever. But who knows, maybe that'll help them survive a little bit more. We'll have to see. Gave Ezreal a 0.2 AP ratio buff to his Q. AP Ezreal is very reliant on Lich Bane, so this like is a straight counteract of that. So that's fine. I've played some AP Ezreal. It's pretty fun. Definitely doesn't impact his AD build that much. You know, if you get 30 AP from, you know, 0.2 increase on 30 AP is what, like 3 or 4 damage or 5 damage, something like that. So not a big deal to the AD carry Ezreal builds. Fizz, again, got a buff to his W because he is a core Lich Bane user. And so this is his active, his Seastone Trident. The active AP ratio was bumped by 0.1. You may think this is kind of annoying because the Lich Bane was nerfed by 0.25. However, if I believe that if you can get 2 or more auto attacks off with your W, this is actually a buff to Fizz. So if you can get, you know, let's say you WQ and then fish them and E them and then maybe get a couple more auto attacks, it will actually do more damage. So that I actually think that this is totally fine on Fizz, and I like the direction. You know, it makes him a little bit less insane in terms of his immediate, you know, if you get like DFG WQ, this doesn't really help you out that much. Heimerdinger, some interesting changes to his turrets. So with the Heimerdinger rework, one of the core complaints is that his turrets are so flimsy. Any sort of long-range mage can very easily, you know, just kill his turrets all the time. So now they are getting AP scaling on their health. And then also they changed the way that the cooldown reduction works with the beam. So now the basic attacks of the turrets will restore the beam charge. So making his turrets just a little bit more beefy and a little bit more durable. And so yeah, I think that this was a nice change to him and definitely needed, because his turrets are so flimsy and so much of Heimerdinger's kit is invested in using his turrets well. Kog'Maw, I actually am really excited about the changes to Kog'Maw. So Kog'Maw is really forgotten because he's got no mobility whatsoever. No speed up, no dash, no way to get away. Only his slow on his E is really the only way they can get away with somebody. But I would argue that Kog'Maw with his W up is the strongest, most damaging AD carry in the game. So think about, let's actually compare Kog'Maw and Vayne. Vayne is often held up as like the best damaging AD carry. But Kog'Maw with his W, first of all, you know, max range 210 on top of iron. So he has 710 range, and he's dealing 6% of the target's max health every auto attack. Whoa, go away. Whereas Vayne is dealing 8% of the target's max health as true damage, which is nice, but every third proc. And also, she's 550 range, so much lower range. You have to stick to the same target to deal your damage. I mean, his Bioarcane Barrage is insane. This is the, hands down, one of the best abilities in the game for an AD carry to have. You know, getting this magic damage, so it's hard to itemize against. The range is tremendous. So overall, you know, that's what Kog'Maw's all about. But then the thing is that the rest of his kit just kind of sucks. His passive is terrible for an AD carry. It doesn't help you at all. His Q is, for the most part, like left with 0 points. Like if you go to pro builds and look at AD carries who play Kog'Maw, they won't even put points in his Q until the last 5 levels of the game. You know, so what they really did is they focused on helping his Q to actually be a useful ability. So The old Q used to be like a 600 range point and click nuke, which didn't make any sense because like if he's auto attacking at 700 range, why would he need to step in to use this ability? It was just very like contradictory with his playstyle. So now it's 1,000 range straight line skill shot. The base damage got increased, and also the real kicker here for AD carry Kog'Maw is that they changed to a percentage armor magic resist shred. So getting this armor magic resist shred really solidifies him as the premier tank busting AD carry who's going to sit back at long range and be this turret of damage. And situationally, Kog'Maw can be insanely powerful in solo queue just because of the amount of damage he can put out. If you can stay alive, and if you're up against a team that doesn't have tremendous dive or assassination potential, and your team has good peel, Kog'Maw is a fabulous choice. Still not going to be, he doesn't have any mobility still, so he can't really get away from these bruisers or these assassins that jump on him. But if you can stay alive, stay in the back, and deal damage, Kog'Maw is insane. So some nice changes to Kog'Maw. I really like the direction they're taking with this. And again, keep an eye on stuff like this. When champions get buffs, they tend to sit under the radar, but then somebody figures it out, and they end up coming back. So I think we could see some Kog'Maw action soon. Nautilus got a little bit of a change to his W. First of all, the cooldown is 18 seconds at all ranks instead of 22. So this is kind of nice. I believe that most Nautiluses will max W first, so not a tremendous change. But then the bonus health ratio was also increased by 5%. Again, not a massive change, just a little bit of love to help him out. I still think that, so the main thing with Nautilus is that so much of his damage is tied in with his W. But once the shield is broken, then he no longer has the damage. And this doesn't necessarily address that, except for maybe increasing this. But I still think he's going to have his core problems. He is tremendous late game with all of his CC. Very strong ganker, but just very weak right now to the meta junglers who, like Lee Sin and Vi and Pantheon, who are very strong early duelists. They'll come invade your jungle, and they'll make your life really sad. So, that doesn't really change, so that doesn't really all of a sudden make Nautilus amazing. I did a video on Nautilus support, and I still really like it. I still think Nautilus support is pretty cool. Check it out. It's a little bit under the radar. It has its trade-offs compared to somebody like Thresh or Leona, but he does have a lot of CC and is pretty fun to play with, so good for him there. Sivir. Sivir is extremely powerful right now. One of the premier AD carries in Korea specifically. Korea tends to really pick up on what is strong and play it, and Sivir has been all over the place. These are nerfs to her. So first of all, her Boomerang Blade will scale down to the minimum damage faster, is basically what this means. So before, if it took like, 5 or 6 enemies for it to get to the minimum damage, now it will just get there at like 4 enemies or something like that. So a little bit of a nerf there in terms of getting big damage to multiple targets. And then the mana cost on her W is increased by 20. And this is kind of a big deal because a lot of times with Sivir, especially with her laning phase, her W really helps her to get through her weak laning. Because if you're up against somebody like Caitlyn, well, she can't really poke you if you're just spamming W and pushing the wave all the time, because she's got a last hit at her turret. So being a little more mana restricted on her W is, you'll feel that a little bit more. But then to compensate, they actually increase the mana return on her spell shield. So if you properly spell shield, it will perfectly balance. You're going from 80 to 60, from 40 to 60. So 20 mana difference, perfectly balanced there. So overall, some nerfs to Sivir. She's still strong. She still has her ultimate. She still has her pushing power. Just a little bit less, I guess, free. Maybe we'll see her fall down a little bit in terms of power, but not too much, I don't think. Some more attention to Skarner after his rework. The rework is generally considered quite bad, actually, which I think is, like, Riot has done a lot of good reworks recently. Sivir is a prime example of somebody who benefited greatly from a Riot rework, but Skarner not so much. This will help him out a little bit, increasing the width and missile speed, making his E easier to hit. I really don't know that much about Skarner, so I can't comment. I don't necessarily know if these are the changes he needed. Thresh, minor change. The souls will last less time, so you have to pick them up faster. Not a big deal. Thresh is still amazing. Tristana, her Q now costs no mana. Oh, did I mention that before? about... I don't know if I mentioned this. This same thing is true on Kog'Maw, and the same thing is true now on Tristana. And what I'll say about this is when their steroids cost no mana, that's actually really nice, because then they can use their steroids whenever the situation actually really calls for it, rather than worrying about mana. And that's really nice. So then Tristana can focus on spamming her E and lane for harassment, keeping mana up for your W to escape, and then using your Q whenever you want to. I think this is a nice little change to Tristana. And so, I still think Tristana is a really powerful AD. She has a weak mid game, which you need to traverse a little bit carefully. And she doesn't have any AD scaling, which a lot of the top AD carries have abilities that have big time AD scaling, whereas Tristana is pretty much a pure auto attack reliant. But she's a beast late game, especially in solo queue with games going long. Tristana can really carry hard in the late game. She's pretty untouchable with her 700 range and her 2 disengages, and now with her free rapid fire. Some nice changes. I really like her, so I'm going to be playing Tristana for sure. TF, basically just balancing the Lich Bane changes, giving him a 0.2 buff overall. TF is still hard to play. His W is hard, a difficult mechanic to master. Using his ultimate well is hard. He's low range. He's got his disadvantages. These don't really change that much. But yeah, TF is a champion who was balanced for competitive play, which ultimately left him really, really bad for the rest of us. So that's still true. Vi, they basically what they did here is they forced her to choose, do you want to build tanky or do you want to build damage? You can't get both. You can't build tanky and do a lot of damage. So they lowered the base damage and increased the AD scaling. I believe that it's somewhere in like the 2 or to 250 AD range is where the break-even point is. So you're going to need to build, the Elder Lizard plus the Brutalizer if you want to kind of get back the damage that she lost. But if you want to go full tank, you still can. Overall, a fine change to Vi. I actually think Vi is really, really annoying. And whenever I play mid lane, I tend to ban her because her ultimate is so annoying. These are some minor bug fixes. I don't think I'm going to go through them all that much. The Lich Bane change I need to cover. So Lich Bane has been and always really is kind of like this undervalued but really powerful item. And it was really strange because it's extremely gold inefficient. It gives AP and mana really, but like not that much. But what it really does is it gives you this extra spell, which used to be 75% AP ratio, which was massive. So certain champions built it into their kit where they really rely on auto attacks, or they have an on-hit effect like Fizz or Ezreal, and then TF with his W, that's like an auto attack. So they need it, but then other champions you'll see it on, like maybe Ziggs or Ahri, and it really distorts the balancing of their kit, because all of a sudden they have a whole nother spell's worth of AP scaling, and it just made it very it would just kind of distort the game in weird ways. It made it hard to balance certain champions. So what they did is they buffed the base damage and then reduced the AP scaling. So 75% of your base attack damage. Most champions start with about 50 and end the game with about 100 base AD. So if you get it really early, it's actually a nerf to the base damage, but once you get to later levels, it'll be a little bit higher in terms of base damage. But then the AP ratio has been reduced. So overall, a little bit less insane in terms of late game scaling. And so yeah, if you like to build Lich Bane on the more unorthodox champions, it's not quite as effective. Some changes here to trinkets where they don't start until 120 seconds. This is primarily going to affect probably competitive play and invades, which you don't see a ton of in solo queue. Some changes coming to the Wriggles line. They're trying to make this a little more competitive. Basically, Wriggles straight up sucks compared to the Spirit line, so they're really trying to help it out, and I think they're making some nice changes. Giving it AD and attack speed is a lot better than armor and attack speed. Armor and attack speed is such a weird combination that it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it's still, the idea with Wriggles is that this is for the champions who want to really hard farm the jungle and then emerge at about 30 minutes as this big carry. There is, I believe, another item coming out that will build out of Wriggles' Lantern that will be pretty insane on champions like Udyr or maybe Xin Zhao or Master Yi, making those guys pretty crazy. So we'll keep an eye on this. These jungle items have had a really big effect on the game. So the change to Wriggles is something to keep an eye on. This could be, if it becomes a viable choice, this could really shake up what champions are strong and played in the jungle. Teleport got a nice change. So if you teleport to a structure, the cooldown is 100 seconds. And so for teleport-based champions like Shen, Dr. Mundo, a lot of these like top laners that will get teleport, maybe even some mid laners, Kassadin, champions that really like to use teleport will be benefited if you use it defensively, which I really like. I actually really like teleport as a summoner spell. People don't expect you to teleport well in solo queue because a lot of times they don't expect people to have good communication. But if you have a good map awareness and you can kind of anticipate when fights are going to happen, teleporting in can really sway, specifically bottom lane. Some really nice teleports from a top laner can have a massive impact. So keep an eye on teleport. And I think these are all changes I don't need to cover. Yep, so that's about it. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the patch. The big Kassadin, I guess I'm just going to call it a nerf. The Lich Bane changes are pretty big. Some other, the Kog'Maw change I really like. Just kind of keep an eye on some of these things. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts down below. I know I got it out a little bit later, and I apologize for that. But better late than never is what I always say. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will see you again soon. Bye.